All right, welcome. Nicole, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm here in my orange tracksuit. It's a good day.
Looking good up in Seattle, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm here with Nicole Resch, co-founder of Imperative. We're going to talk about purpose, connection, the role of peer coaching. So if you would, Nicole, introduce yourself and we'll get into it.
Yeah, I'd love to. As Al mentioned, I'm Nicole Resch and I work for, I'm one of the co-founders here at Imperative. And I started this work about 5 years ago. I had been at Microsoft for 10 years at the time and had been focused mostly on learning and development, talent development. And it was right when Satya joined, and he had started painting this extraordinary picture of a culture that was rooted in growth mindset and collaboration and psychological safety, and essentially everything that we all want in a fulfilling work experience. And what I realized is, yes, this is absolutely the culture I aspire to create. And also, all of our legacy structures support our legacy culture. And so, realized it was going to take a long time to turn that ship around. And that's about the time I met Aaron, who was focused on trying to figure out how do we create a work culture where fulfillment can coexist side by side with business results. And here I am.
And here you are. And I have to say, when I first heard Aaron talk about this a few years ago, and he presented actually at PAFOW San Francisco in early 2021, right before COVID hit. And I was enamored, as was the audience, around the value of peers and how they're so formative early in our life, and how we learn to share, how we learn to explore, how we learn to be vulnerable and to help one another. So, and I thought, gosh, how is this happening now with COVID and, with remote work? So I got really excited. We talked about doing things together, and I had the privilege of going through the platform. And so before we turn it over to you, I want to share a little bit about it, because to your point, I was really taken by the, not polarity, that's the wrong word, but the distinction between systematic change and societal change and individual or small kind of maybe micro change, and how we as individuals might be more predisposed or more interested in focusing on one or the other. What you're seeing now is my draft purpose statement. Again, this is straight from the Imperative platform. And your purpose is to help everyone. So I'm kind of a macro change guy. I'll admit that going in, and to overcome barriers to achieve harmony by creating remarkable environments and experiences. So we talk about employee experience, worker experience, people data for good. This was, screaming, hey, this is cool. This is what I believe, I'm all about. And yeah, I'd like to connect with others who have similar, passions and interests. And so as I concluded, I went, okay, here's peer match schedule, create my first conversation. I'm getting all giddy about this. And then I go to a set of resources. So I downloaded a report. So I know you're going to talk about this. So if you're a member of the PAFOW community, you now have access to what I'm showing here. You go through the intake instrument, and then you can see peer coaching tutorial. You can get onboarded through a video. You can download your individual report. So congratulations on what you've achieved. So with that as a stage setting,
Yeah.
do you want to talk about what the core value proposition and reasoning you created this solution? I know you touched on it already. It's just, I'm particularly with remote work and hybrid work, I mean, this need to connect in very meaningful ways to benefit not only yourself professionally, but you as an individual, get you energy. I mean, look at me right now. I'm getting all fired up. But please take it away.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, thanks a lot, Alan. I'm actually excited to dig in a little bit more on your purpose profile. It's a great preview. So yeah, to Al's point, we got into this work. It came out of Aaron's work with the Taproot Foundation. So some of you may have heard of the Taproot Foundation. It's essentially a global pro bono marketplace for nonprofits. So whereas, previously, if you were a lawyer, you could be very easily connected with individuals or companies that needed your skill set. If you weren't, it was really very ad hoc. And so this really enabled people like all of us who have other professional skills to be matched up with a nonprofit organization that needs our particular kind of capacity building. And what was interesting as Aaron leaned more into that work, there was this really powerful theme of what he heard from volunteers around the world. And that was, I am getting so much more fulfillment out of this work than I am in my paycheck job. And that was a pretty profound theme for two different reasons. One is that it really surfaced the fact that work was broken. Work should be the marriage between the gifts you have to offer the world and what the world needs. And people were spending 50, 60 hours of work doing something that wasn't providing them with that. And so on top of that, they were going out to volunteer in order to find that. And the second reason that was important is that essentially this provided a global research study on intrinsic motivation in the workplace, really the powers behind fulfillment at work. And so we started to baseline, what does work look like today? And we found a couple of pretty startling things. First off, 2/3 of the workforce is unfulfilled. What that means is that you've got people in your workforce who they don't have meaningful relationships. They're not making an impact that's meaningful to them. They don't have growth opportunities, and ultimately it's impacting their level of happiness and fulfillment at work. And over on the right, you can see these are the words that people were using in our research to describe how they felt about work. And so again, fundamentally something was broken. And what's interesting is just this year, Adamsen came out in their annual trust study, and for the very first time, a lack of fulfillment is the number one reason that people left to find a new job. So the research supports that this is really the core issue to be solved in society right now. So it also begs the question, well, then what is a fulfilling job? So Al, I'd be curious to know, if I say to you, fulfilling job, give me a couple of examples of jobs you would say, yep, this, if I can do this, it will be fulfilling. Oh, and I can't hear you, Al. So I am going to share what we typically
No, I can. I should be more skilled at unmuting. My empowering people and specifically helping people feel what I call seen, heard, and empowered.
Yeah.
So they're not invisible, that they're actually appreciated and their ideas are considered. So that's really fulfilling to me.
Yep. And actually is aligned very much with the outcomes of your purpose assessment, which we'll come back to in just a moment. And so, yeah, we often hear, what we typically hear is, there are specific jobs that lend themselves to what you just shared. So doctor, teacher, leader of a nonprofit organization, a community-based organization. And what we found in our research was, interestingly, that is not true. In fact, that the idea of there actually being a job that is fulfilling and other jobs that are not fulfilling is a fundamental myth in society. What we found instead is that there are a tremendous number of people in those fulfilling job titles, if you will, that are not fulfilled. And we also found, by the same token, that there are equally large numbers of people that are in jobs that you wouldn't historically think were fulfilling that are deeply fulfilled. And the reason for that is that it's people themselves that make the meaning out of the work. And that was a pretty big moment of awakening for us. And so then the question becomes, well, why is that? Because we can't seek to solve this if we don't really understand what are the core drivers of that. And what we found is the reason employees are unfulfilled really comes down to three things. The first one is a lack of meaningful relationships. And, over and above a lack of relationships, if you think about culture at work, we actually block meaningful relationship in a lot of cases. If you think about how we do calibration and talent recognition, et cetera. So we sort of engineer it out of the workplace. And similarly, we haven't normalized reflection. And yet reflection is really how we process all of the emotion and experience that we have at work. It's just not something that's engineered into the workday. And finally, people just they're not able to connect their purpose with their work. And largely it's because they don't have language for even talking about fulfillment. And so it's no wonder that people are not fulfilled given these three criteria. So I want to dig into those three a little bit more deeply. So if you think about relationships, coming into the pandemic, so even in 2019, before 2020 and everything that has ensued, 61% of the workforce self-identified as lonely. So you can imagine what that looks like today. Some of you may be familiar with the statistic that an average employee used to have 6 friends. In 1 year into the pandemic, that was cut in half down to 3. So this statistic is probably artificially low. What we know is that when we're in that state, that loneliness state, that's when we most need connection. It's also when we are least likely to seek connection. And so it starts this negative flywheel where you go into that state, that sort of depressed, stressed, angsty state. And it then sabotages all of sort of the foundations of your fulfillment and success at work. Things like your ability to manage through change, have empathy, collaborate, everything that contributes to that work experience. And so it's this negative cycle. Similarly, with reflection, again, if you think about how our work days are structured. So I know that for me, I start about 7 or 8 o'clock, and I am just trying to get from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting, and trying to get my camera aligned, trying to capture what I need to do. And so really each day is just getting through it. There aren't these moments of trying to reflect and process and find meaning out of those experiences. And so again, I don't have a capacity. We haven't normalized this process of reflection that is so core to our fulfillment at work and our ability to learn and integrate. The last piece of this is, again, that purpose piece. McKinsey did a study recently on this and found that most of the workforce don't even think that it's possible. And if you think about that myth that I surfaced just a moment ago, most people think that a purpose and fulfillment is actually aligned with a particular job. And so if their job doesn't check that box, it's off the table. And for those that maybe do, they don't have that language. And so these are the three core ways that we have tackled this. And the first thing is what you've just surfaced was really helping people understand what are their core drivers of fulfillment and purpose in the workplace. And so we've developed a 27 question assessment that you just completed, Al. And really it's designed to surface those three core drivers. What is the elevation at which you seek to have an impact? What are the values that drive your work? And how do you approach your work? So I'm curious to know, Al, thinking about where your purpose line. First off, what is your purpose archetype? I want to know that. You're not an empowerer?
If I had to choose, I would want to be an empowerer, but it came across as advocate.
Sure. Okay. And so I'm curious to know out of the purpose statement, what was the thing that resonated with you most? Did it and did it feel authentic to who you are?
It did actually, and I loved the nature of the questions, and I don't use that term lightly because having been a survey designer myself throughout my
Yeah.
career, I go through surveys, but this one was challenging, meaning, I would see there's variability in the results that someone would go through. And I also like that there was a prompt to pause and not just
Yeah.
rush through it to make sure that you're truly, answering in an authentic voice. So to answer your question, the idea of helping everyone, making the world a better place, people data for good, that is something that, again, as I shared at the outset, I want to create systems and processes where people can be successful and be seen, heard, and empowered. So, do I advocate on their behalf? That's how I translated that archetype, is
Yep.
that I help them have a voice. And so, insofar as, I now have the ability to either connect with a diverse group of, and because when we do this, I think about Malcolm Gladwell, mavens and connectors and salespeople, and I know Michael Arena has done some great work at GM and now at Amazon around these different archetypes and celebrating people for who they are, for their unique contributions, not just what's on a job description. So anyway, without getting more long-winded, I felt that it very accurately represented, who I am and who I inspire to be.
Yep. Good. So we want to hear. And again, it's, typically takes about 10 to 15 minutes. And so coming back to sort of those core three drivers of fulfillment, this is the third one. It's really helping folks understand the language of their own individual purpose so that they can start to integrate that into their own current work experience. So then what we did next was to create this, I jumped ahead, to create this opportunity for reflection. Again, that reflection that we've just normalized right out of the workforce. And so what we do is we take those insights, Al, that you've just identified, and then we use them to personalize a conversation between two peers. And so what we really seek to do is to connect people across difference and across silos in an organization, but bond them across one of those dimensions of purpose to start developing that trust in service of those meaningful connections and those meaningful relationships over time. And then lastly, thinking about that last element, which is the human connection that we're so desperately needing and missing. In order to restore that, as you're reflecting, that happens with another person. And so you are naturally then starting to build back in those meaningful connections into the workplace where we've cut in half our friendships at work, if you will, through the course of the pandemic. We're now trying to restore those through these positive, consistent, and sort of vulnerability-based connections that focus on releasing that chemical oxytocin. We know that happens when you really just a few life experiences, physical touch, nursing is one of them, and also when you meaningfully connect with another individual. And thanks to all the the neuroscientists out there, we now know that the physiological effects of that, the ability to adapt, the ability to learn and grow, and all of, again, those foundations of fulfillment at work. And so what we're finding, we've had about 40,000 of these conversations completed now on the platform. So we've got a pretty solid data set that helps us see that it's working. And this is how we're addressing the gaps. The first thing is we're able to see that almost 90% of folks are not only forming a meaningful new connection, but they're forming one with someone with whom they'd like to stay in touch. So it's persistent. The second thing we're seeing is, as an outcome of the reflection, we know that's effective because it's leading to action 80% of the time. And then the last thing is people are now starting to be able to link the work they're doing today with their purpose. And that's really important as we think about this sort of mass resignation. People are not having these conversations and sort of developing this insight on purpose and then feeling like they have to leave. They're realizing, no, that they actually have the agency to create it right inside of their current work experience. So if you look at sort of the macro level of this and the impact on organizations, what we're finding is, typically there's about 65% of folks that are at risk for leaving. And we're finding that those folks are experiencing a material increase in their fulfillment in just 3 months. And we're also finding that we're now doubling friendships over the course of a year, back to that 6 to 8 level that we had when we entered the pandemic. This is the emotional side of that. So it's a lot of data and it's a great organizational context, but bringing this back to the human experience, we ask people, well, how do you feel after these conversations? And whereas they're entering with all of what you saw before, the overwhelm, the overtax, the chaos, these are the words that people use to describe how they feel as they're exiting these connections that are rooted in purpose and fulfillment. So this is that oxytocin at play. So one of the interesting things is with anything else, going to the gym or eating a salad, it's not enough to just do it once. And there's probably a lot of folks out there on this call that are very familiar with the sort of being in peak energy zone and how quickly you can descend into burnout zone. And so the way we've designed this is to be consistent over time. So we design this around this bi-weekly connection and a new peer every quarter, so that you're maintaining that peak energy zone and avoiding that burnout that we have so often experienced over the course of the last couple of years. So here's where our work took a little bit of a left turn. Frankly, it was quite unexpected. What we have found is that in addition to all of what we thought we were going to find, enabling people to get more in touch with their purpose and sort of increase that level of fulfillment, we also found that we were almost accidentally addressing one of the core issues in society right now, and that is belonging. We were hearing anecdotally over and over from our coaches that, wow, it has been so extraordinary to be connected with someone with a very different lived experience. And that could have been a dimension of identity. It could have been a different function. It could have been a different geography, a different culture, a different political view. Whatever it is, what we're doing is we're enabling people to fundamentally connect around their shared humanity. And it's creating bridges where they didn't exist before. And so we're starting to lean much more heavily into that sort of belonging cultivation inside of an organization, because we're finding that we're making things possible that haven't been possible before. So from an organizational context, creating a more inclusive culture, creating a space where people that have historically been underrepresented want to stay. And on the individual side, really manufacturing over and over these stories of, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. One of the other stories we hear over and over is that work can feel like gaslighting, in the sense that it feels like I'm the only person in the entire ecosystem that's experiencing this. And suddenly within 30 minutes, they're connected with someone new. And through a curated list of questions, they're realizing, wow, I'm not alone. And even though Al may be very different from me, we're fundamentally experiencing the same thing, and we're able to work through it together. And now I have that connection. So we've been leaning more into belonging, and we've also just been pulling back and looking at, okay, so what are the other cultural implications? And so we're finding that these connections can have an implication for innovation inside of your organization, well-being, purpose, belonging, collaboration. And some of you may be familiar with Rob Cross. So he's an expert in organizational network analysis. And so we've been leveraging a lot of his research and getting his input on what are the very specific types of connections that we can make and the types of networks that we can enable people to make inside of an organization in service of these 5 different culture dials, if you will, so that now we've sort of created this culture dashboard that we've never had before inside of an organization. And getting a little bit more practical, because there are implications for this across the entire talent lifecycle, we find that our customers are integrating this into everything from onboarding to succession planning to talent development, excuse me, to their diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy, excuse me. So it's coming alive throughout the entire talent lifecycle. One of the questions we've gotten, and this may be true for some of you as well, is, okay, this all sounds great, right? This works really well for you because you're in HR, or you're in marketing, or you're in sales, but what about engineers? What about in a manufacturing environment? What about sort of fill in the blank? And what we have found is that as human beings, we all share that need for connection, and we share that need for fulfilling work. And so we're finding that this is actually effective across industries, across identities, across geographies, really across every dimension of difference inside of the organization. So really, to pull this all back to where we started, I've reinforced these themes of connection, of reflection, and Gartner just came out with their position on what are the 5 pillars of the new employee value proposition coming out of the pandemic. And what really excited our team so much is that now we're starting to see this normalization of things like purpose and connection and radical flexibility inside of the work context. And there's this realization that these things are not any longer a side dish when we have extra budget. These are so core and fundamental to the social and emotional experience at work that they're ultimately core and fundamental to business success. And so it's wonderful to see now organizations starting to lean into, how do we scale this? So what's next? So Al, it's wonderful that you want to offer this to all of your members as an opportunity to connect. And so here in a second, I'm going to share with you how you can be put into effectively the matching pool for peer coaching within the PAFOW membership. And please jump in, Al, if there's anything I'm misrepresenting here. But what we are going to do is we've made a purpose profile available to each of you. And so I'll put that here in the chat in just a moment. So in order to opt in, if you want to be put into that matching pool, take 10, 15 minutes, complete your purpose profile, what Al just shared with you. And that'll then put you into a pool of other members across the PAFOW community, across, I don't know if it's global, Al, or domestic.
Global.
Oh, fantastic. So you'll be put into a global pool, and we do take into account time zone in our matching algorithm. And then you'll be paired with somebody for a series of guided conversations, and you'll be paired across a commonality in one of your dimensions of purpose. And you'll be matched for 5 conversations over the course of a quarter, and then you'll have an opportunity to go back into the pool and be matched again. And so in this way, we're inviting you to start to create that community of meaningful connection inside of the PAFOW organization. So that, Al, I'm going to kick it back over to you. I think I'm going to stop sharing here. I can. And I will invite you, Al, to wrap us up.
Yeah, and if you're listening and participating here, by all means, ask some questions. I do have several before we wrap. And so I say we have probably 10, 15 more minutes unless there are additional questions coming in. Because my question is this, is that there's data that has been shared on this show, and it's in the popular press now, that people are working longer, meetings are shorter, and they're having more meetings. And there's also this big push to empathize with your coworkers. And so if I have a bunch of 30-minute meetings and, hey, how you doing? And are you supposed to like be vulnerable in that moment? And you can spend the whole 30 minutes just talking about how one another's doing and not get work done. And, at the same time, you don't want to be dismissive of how somebody's doing. So then it invites the question, when and where do I get me time? Where's that radical self-care where I know that there's something on the horizon where I get to talk and share and explore and be vulnerable and help somebody. And that's what I see this as, is that, okay, I'm going to work, I'm going to focus, get things done. And I know on Friday at 1 p.m. after lunch, I'm going to talk with so-and-so. And we're going to talk about, what's really going on, and I'm going to get, be vulnerable. I'm going to, share, and I'm going to get value out of that. So I think this is something that, from a community standpoint, I think is going to be valuable. But my question is, and I want you to comment on what I just shared.
Sure.
But your sweet spot, I want to highlight, is actually doing this within organizations. So I'm now connecting with people, particularly potentially in different departments who are different tenure, so it could be used for onboarding purposes. So can you speak to that notion that this is kind of me time, and that this is uniquely valuable structure that allows me to take care of me and help take care of somebody else?
Yeah, I'm happy to, Al. It's a key question. And the first thing I want to address is what you said earlier about that uncertainty. That's a real issue, actually. And what we have found is that it's core to the success of this, and core to people feeling like they have permission, is having somebody in sort of an influential leader position be very visibly participating themselves. What we found early on is that if my manager doesn't know about this, if my leader doesn't know about this, then I still am not sure, is this something I can do? Because remember, reflection and this kind of meaningful connection, it's not something that we've normalized in the past. And so we have found that it makes a tremendous difference when you start to answer that very question, which is, what do I do in this meeting? It's really, really critical to engage leaders in participating in this. And then the second thing is, you talk about forming, and what you're essentially talking about is forming a new habit. And what we hear is that as people start to lean into this on sort of a regular cadence with support of their leadership, it starts to normalize that happening and using that language inside of a meeting. And so rather than opening up the Zoom meeting with, how are you doing? You're starting to opening up a Zoom meeting with something a little bit more substantial that recognizes the shared experience we're having of starting to talk about fulfillment and of focusing, to your point, on me time. It starts to normalize it in the culture.
To your point earlier, we historically haven't had language around this, nor arguably have we had permission to be talking about this. It's like, hey, this is not adding business value. It's not, not a direct through line to profit and loss, so, and you mentioned this earlier. So not only is it well-being for well-being's sake, it actually helps people elevate their capacity and resilience. Yes. Correct me if I'm wrong. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think I want to share a story. And this is emblematic of a story that we've heard over and over and over. We recently had a scenario where two engineers were connected, and one was from India and one was from Pakistan, and there are some historical tensions there. And so both of these gentlemen leaned into this with an open mind, but they shared with us afterward they were very, very trepidatious. And so they found that in the first 20 minutes or so, they started laughing a little bit of the first conversation. And as things progressed, things got a little warmer. And they reported by the end of these 5 conversations that they emerged using the language of brother to talk to one another. And they actually identified a project they were collaborating on, never having known folks before. And so coming back to your question, the implications for this go far beyond the individual well-being. You're starting to talk about people leaning into things like curiosity, like innovation, like different perspective, all of which are core to business value. If you ask any real progressive leader right now, they're going to tell you that if you can't overcome these things, you're not going to sustain in the next 5 years.
Hmm.
And it's wonderful. By the way, I love the heart emojis. That is absolutely the right response, and that's how we felt inside of our organization when we heard this story. And it's one that's been repeated.
Yes. So as we start to wrap, because I do want to encourage people who are on this this episode to take some time before the top of the next hour to actually go and complete the profile. If you don't, if you go in there and you don't have an email, please contact us at inquiry@pafow.net or myself or Malaz El Sheikh. We can get you, situated with it. As we start to wrap, I would like to, number one, celebrate what you and Aaron, have achieved. I think this is a real need, particularly when we've already normalized remote and hybrid work. So one of the kind of trigger statements or constructs in IO psychology over the past 30 years has been, best friend at work.
Yeah.
And with Gallup Q12. And so what does that mean? Is it substantial? Is it silly? Is it substantive? The fast forwarding on that to now is like, I have a best friend at work. Best friend might not be the right construct for today, but do I have someone where I can be open and vulnerable to, that I can share and explore, and that I can help as well? Because correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to feel good by listening actively and empathizing and ideating with somebody else, so they can problem solve and be better at what they do. So what's your response to that notion that, this is kind of filling the gap of best friend at work?
Well, my response is a resounding absolutely, but I want to go a little bit deeper, because there's another, and again, it's storytelling, Al, but there's another theme that we hear over and over, and that is, this is giving me a safe place to process challenges and solve for them with someone who understands my organizational context, who understands the challenges I'm going through, but who isn't a manager, who isn't HR, who isn't a learning and development person, who isn't a leader. And that is what we are seeking to do, is to really create connections that are truly in that peer group, so that, to your point, Al, you've got a space that we just haven't had before for connecting and forming those bonds with someone, but actually taking it beyond the best friend part of it and truly rooting it in vulnerability based trust and authentic connection. So that, I can call Al on the bat phone and say, look, dude, I don't know how to confront this, or I just had this conversation and I know you're going to be of service because you understand what I'm going through, because you're dealing with the same problem, because we're both a senior director, or we're both a senior manager, or we're both an IC, but there's not a consequence, because we're not competing for the same bonus and we're not evaluating each other. And we mean it, probably not even in the same team.
And historically, if someone was lucky, what you're talking about happened serendipitously, and both people had the skills to construct that interaction in a healthy way. At scale, however, and particularly with remote work, you're not just going to randomly run into somebody, either physically or online. If you do, great. But this is really facilitating that connection, number one, and then facilitating the conversation, number two, both of which, particularly given hybrid remote work, are critically valuable. I mean, it wouldn't happen otherwise.
I agree. And I would also go as far to say, as an introvert, so I'm the extreme end of the introversion scale. And, I may not be in that category of person that is going to always manufacture that connection. It takes a very long time. And I also may not be in that category of person who is going to ask questions that really get to someone's core. What we hear often is, gosh, these are things I would love to have asked someone, but I might have been too shy before. And so because the platform is telling me to do so, I now feel a comfort level asking questions that really enable me to connect. Whereas I wouldn't have had that opportunity before. And to your point, yes, Al, we're creating a drumbeat around something and sort of opening a door to something happening that not only didn't happen except serendipitously before, but has now been, again, engineered right out of the work experience through the course of this forced remote work posture.
Well, I absolutely love it. And as we start to wrap here, I'm going to share my screen one more time, not only for the people on this, but for those who view the video afterwards. And I just want, I don't think you've seen this, Nicole. So
Yeah,
it'll
I'm
be
on the edge of my seat, Al.
good for you as well. So what is what this is I'm showing our website now. So this is the main page. You can join our community. So there's a new process there. And this is today's episode. So within the website, and there's several ways to navigate here, is a landing page that talks about the value of peer relationships. There's a little video talking about what we're offering within the PAFOW community. There's some research and assets that Imperative has generated and related articles. Here, by clicking this link, you can actually get started, and this will take you over to the Imperative app. I've already been through this, so it might, it goes directly to where I landed. But if you have not done this yet, it will get you started. So you can go to pafow.net /peer coaching, or you can just go to landing page and navigate there. So, with that, get started. And again, if the system doesn't recognize you, that means you haven't registered yet, then go and register as a member of the PAFOW community, and we'll make sure we get your email profile in there so you can, in fact, set up your profile in Imperative and get going.
Yep, app.imperative.com/sign up. I've put it in the chat window here. So click that link and get started, and we'll look forward to matching you. Thanks a lot, Al.
Hey, Nicole, thank you. I super appreciate it. And yet again, congratulations on what you and Aaron have achieved, and be well, and hope to see you in person before too long.
Absolutely.
All right. Take care. Bye.